Okay, please be seated. It's time for the last session, or the final discussion, where we will also try to see where we will go from here. But let's start with Uri's comments.
Well, my first comments is thank you, Hans. Again, somehow you made it seem like it was my effort. It was not. It was very much a joint one. And thank you again very much. And I will insist on thank you very much. Okay, so we wanted to talk, I think, about at least two things, and get feedback from the audience and see what you guys think. One is we wanted to have one more of these, and the thought was, so that's one. The second thing is we wanted some kind of written record, a written record from this, and that's the second thing. But I'll start with the first. So the thought is to try and have another one of these conferences in the winter of 2018-19 in California. Winter California goes well together. So I have to get the details yet, but as part of my agreement to go to Chapman University to start up there, they've agreed to fund one more of these conferences in 20. We'll have to see exactly when. They kind of left it up to us. But the thought is to do it in the winter of 2018. So I don't know, December 2018, January, February 2019, something like that. But we'll see it. We'll try to send slightly earlier notifications than a month or two in advance, as happened here because of funding and various different issues. But if there are any thoughts about that, maybe we should open it if people have some specific thoughts and so on. I should say one more thing. We will try to do it scientifically, quote unquote, so we'll compile a questionnaire that we will send a link to everybody. Do you think the talk should be longer, the comments should be shorter, this, that, and leave some open comments as well. We'll try to do it soon, probably within 2 weeks, because both Hans and I are now going to a place where there's no internet up north in Sweden. Not together, well, actually he recommended the place. Maybe you didn't want me where you are, so you want to make sure I'm going to be somewhere else. So he sent me all the way up north where the sun never stops shining. But anyway, so once we get back, we're going to send that out, and we hope you guys will take a few minutes to respond so that we can learn what people think about different things about the conference and make the next one better. But if there are any thoughts about what we should do for the next conference that you want to share right now, that would be great. If not, we'll just move on to the second thing.
You have a conference venue in mind as nice as this one?
So it's going to be somewhere around Orange County in California. So it's going to be nice in the sense that it's going to be 25 degrees in January, and it's going to be close enough to the ocean that you can probably go for a dip if you really want to do that. But we will, finding things that are 100 years old in California is hard, although Chapman is. So I don't know, I'm just working. I don't know about there, but it's not going to be like this, but it'll be, weather hopefully is going to be like this.
I would make a proposal that there be a set of questions that would be raised and working groups that would try to work on those questions to work toward answers or to work toward ways to get answers of those questions. It's of course fun, as we did here, to sort of present all the information. And one could do that again, but it might be more interesting to try to figure out how to get toward answers to some of the pressing issues.
That's interesting. That's, I think, a good and interesting idea. Anyone else with thoughts about that? Okay, so the second thing is about the written records. I think both the funding agencies behind this and we, and hopefully you, would like to see some kind of proceedings coming from this conference. One of the issues with interdisciplinary conferences like these are that there are different rules of what is prestigious in different disciplines. I know that for philosophers and law scholars, book chapters are often a very respectable venue for your thoughts. For scientists, they are probably the least prestigious thing you can do, and most, I mean, if you're like me and will be up for tenure in a few years, hopefully, then people are going to look at those and say, why did you waste your time? So the question of how to do it, one thought that we had was that we will try to find a venue for a special issue of a journal, a neuroscience journal where we could send in our publications. We'll have to see exactly how to do it, maybe through us or directly to them, we'll have to see. But then of course, I mean, our philosophers, law scholars and so on, and the audience are welcome to send it there as well, but they may or may not want to, or the journal may or may not want to publish those. That's why we thought we'd do two things. We do that, and we would try to have a book come out of this, where for the scientists it would be you take your research paper or commentary or whatever you end up sending to the journal, and what you can do in a book chapter is be a bit more speculative, which is nice, you know, when you go through the peer review and every word, like people, you know, what do you mean when you say so and so and so on? So we could try to be a bit more speculative in the book chapter, so we would try to have both of these, so both a book and a special issue in a journal. One thought we had was I keep on forgetting. Neuroscience of Consciousness, thank you. It's a new journal that's just come out. We could try them. We could also try Frontiers. We could try a few things.
There's another one. There's the ROPP, the Review of Philosophy and Psychology, and they would be happily published papers of both sorts.
So again, we have to find the right venue, but again, if people have thoughts about this and how and what we should do, then...
Maybe I should just say that we have been contacted by the Frontiers in Neuroscience, and they were very interested in publishing something coming out from this conference. So that said, you can comment as you wish.
Yeah, we just have a technical comment that they would make for everyone who would be judged with a book chapter as why did you waste your time. If we go for a CC BY license for all the articles, then you can just reprint them with the app would be perfectly legal. Nobody would ever charge you with a reproach that why did you waste your time.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Just about that's a very good idea, but it costs money to do open access publication, and so do you have source of funding for publication?
I look at you, Hans.
Not really.
Also there, that depends really highly on your institution. There's a lot of institutions you have to ask your library, and a lot of institutions have funds for that pay that for you. And especially if it's in a journal where it's, you know, below $1,000 that not everywhere, but in a lot of cases, you do have. So what that means is that in all those institutions where you don't have these funds, which are rare, it's just, you know, it's a small amount of money that eventually ends up that we'll have to fund rather than every single one.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this? Right. So Hans, I think you had...
I guess this is also something we will ask you to think about while until we come back from the north, if we come back. As far as possible.
Exactly, that's what I understand.
Okay, if you don't have any further thoughts on that, I would just like to say something about how happy we are here to have had you here. I think I've said it a couple of times, but I would like to say it again, because here at the Sigtuna Foundation and the Agora for Biosystems, we have had dialogues and symposia of many kinds for a long time, for about 20 years together. And dialogue has been the main theme. I mean, trying to get people together to try to understand each other better, or understand each other's fields better. So it's to bring together, for example, the first objective was to bring together scientists and or experimentalists and theoreticians in the biosciences. That was our primary goal for the Agora for Biosystems. Now, Sigtuna Foundation has had the idea of having a dialogue between, at first, as we heard from Alf's presentation previously, on Christianity and society in particular. Art, culture has been part of this, and to less extent science. So science and culture, humanities and so forth has also been one of our main ideas with these dialogues of at different levels. And this conference here, I think, is a perfect example of such dialogue where people from different backgrounds try to come together to not get a consensus, but to understand each other better. Hopefully we have during these days. There's often a matter of language issues. I mean, how do we understand each other when we use our language differently? There was a discussion today on conceptual and empirical approaches to problems. And I think this is something we have to deal with more and think about more in our different disciplines. And in particular when we have interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, cross-cultural discussions and dialogues, that we use our concepts differently, and we have to try to reach each other on a way that we understand what we mean by the concepts that we use, because sometimes we are very sloppy in using these concepts, and sometimes we are not even thinking about the concepts that we're using. I'm, as I said before, a biophysicist, and I've had many struggles. I'm trained originally as a physicist, but just to speak with biologists can be problematic sometimes. I mean, to get an understanding of how they think and so forth. So language is very important, but first of all, it's important to put down your prestige and to be respectful to listening to each other and trying to understand what the other person or the other perspective is saying about an issue. In the field that I'm working on right now, I'm working on computational modeling of decision making. Very few people think about free will in this field, and free will is sort of sometimes it's you presuppose that there is a free will, but if you want to make a computer or a robot that makes a decision, you don't really think about it as having anything to do with free will. And in fact, many people think that free will is a pseudo-problem. They don't think, well, so what? Why are you interested in free will? I mean, it's not really a real problem. Until it comes to this issue that we talked about today, actually, when practical cases where you have to see what is responsible or what has caused a certain action. I think that is a very important issue when we try to understand the different levels of understanding. And that actually is also about, I think it was Tom raised this issue of different levels. I think this is actually one of the greatest challenges in all sciences today, or in many of the, not only sciences, but many of our endeavors, that we are trying to reach not only dialogue within a level, but also between levels, trying to understand microscopic, mesoscopic, macroscopic levels and how they are interconnected. That's also a kind of dialogue between different levels. And using concepts at one level that are created for another level is not always so fruitful. In fact, it may be misleading if you talk about, even talking about temperature as an emergent phenomenon, let's say from billions and billions of atoms or molecules interacting. You can't talk about the temperature of a single molecule, and so forth. So this concept that we use at one level, like free will, cognition, consciousness, and so forth, may not be, at least not easily applicable at a much lower level. And lower in this sense means in an organizational, let's say, even network level of a neural system, or a neural level, or ion channel level, or whatever. So the concepts that we use should be appropriate for the level that we are talking about. And of course the questions and the problems that we are dealing with are also different depending on what level we are talking about. So I think these issues are very seldom discussed at our universities, at least not here in this country, because we take certain things for granted, and we are often very much dependent on our own discipline and how we discuss it at our own workplace. And it's very seldom that we get a chance to interact with people with different perspectives and people from other levels than we are working on ourselves. So I think this idea of bringing together people from different disciplines, different cultures and so forth is a very important thing to try to get about, but it's also very challenging. And I think when one comes to a meeting like this, I think one has expectations that we will solve problems together. And I think the time is too limited for that. I think we have to be humble and trying to see that it takes time. And just opening it up like we have done today, I think in these days we at least open up for the questions. I'm not sending, but I've suggested Uri and his family to go to one of my favorite places in Sweden, which is Abisko. It's a national park in northern Sweden, and it's also known for its beauty, but it's also known for its research station up there, where I and Peter Orham and others, Petra has been there, and Hans Braun, and some other of you have been there for workshops on complex systems, and where we have tried to bring together people from different disciplines. And I would just say a little anecdotal story from one of those meetings in 1992, where we had Daniel Dennett and Roger Penrose, and they were going to talk about consciousness. And we had 4.5 days of a workshop where these issues were going to. It was not only those people, Stuart Hammeroff and others were there as well, but those were the main figures. At the very last day, we had a dialogue, or it wasn't a dialogue, I can confess, but it was a debate on different opinions on consciousness. And it turned out that Daniel Dennett, who told Roger Penrose what mathematics is all about, and he told people that, or Daniel Dennett told Penrose that everything is computable. Everything in this universe is computable, and that means that it could be algorithmic, it could be simulated on a computer in principle. Whereas Roger Penrose, himself being a mathematician and a mathematical physicist, very humble, saying that, well, my understanding of mathematics is that if all of this is mathematics, this is what is computable in mathematics. So how can you say that everything is computable? And then they had a long discussion on algorithmic. What is it to be algorithmic? They had been using these terms all the time for 4 days as well, but didn't realize that they used the terms differently. And there was no way that these two could meet in their understanding. Roger Penrose's main point was that consciousness is uncomputable. It's a non-computable process. So there was no way they could agree to whether consciousness and everything in the world was computable or not. But they couldn't even agree on what do you mean by computable. So even this example shows that many times, and as you probably know, Daniel Dennett wrote a book on Consciousness Explained, and I don't know how many of you have read that book. Well, at least, yeah, okay. Did you think he explained consciousness? No. So again, what is an explanation? What kind of answers do we want to get? What can we expect to get an answer for when we ask our questions? I think this is also very interesting. When we have our idea of what is free will, what could make us change our minds on this? What kind of experiment would be decisive for us to say that now I understand it, so what I did understand before is not valid. I have to change my mind to accept the other position, what I didn't have before. I think it would be useful to think about that. What kind of experiment or what kind of observation would be helpful for us, or would be not helpful, what would make us change our minds? If there's nothing that would change our mind, then we should think a little bit. What is a problem? We don't have to change our minds, but we should know what could change our minds. I think this is very essential. And I think this is very essential in all kinds of dialogues, that we are willing to change our minds, that we are willing to listen to another person or to arguments that are contrary to our own, and actually change our minds. So that is a challenge, I think, for our next meeting, to think about what could change our minds on this particular issue on free will. So,
this actually goes well with what Mark Hallett, I think, was saying. I don't know if we want to have such a global question, but still, I think Alice would attest when students come to me and they say, I want to do an experiment about something. So I say, okay, let's start with a Gedanken experiment. You know, let's assume we've got access to whatever you want, and let's think how we do it then, and then kind of bring it down to what we can do today, and so on. So maybe even to try to think of these questions very high up to begin with, and then try to think again. Right now we don't have access. Right now we don't have this. We don't have that. But at least what right? You're asking what in principle could be right that which, and I think a lot of these things came from scientists. I think Gabriel was asking these questions a lot. So what would convince you? When philosophers are sitting here say, what would convince you? Okay, we've done nothing that convinces you. What would? So I think that's actually a good question to ask. I completely agree.
okay. Are there any more questions you want to raise now at this early stage, or late stage perhaps, if you think of it in terms of the conference? But before we go further, yes.
Thanks. So it's not really a question, but something for the general mix of things and ways of working. So we've talked about how to approach things in many different ways, and you talked about willingness to listen from one discipline to another and all that. So let me give you a practical example. I worked in a group in Princeton for 9 months with a number of psychologists, biologists, anthropologists. It took us 6 months to start to understand each other. And then after 6 months, we started to make some progress. But we would have never made any kind of progress if we had started from the brick questions. So that didn't usually work. That's something that I learned. So if you start from, well, what's free will? We probably won't get very far. But if we start from some specific results, some specific cases that everyone can say something about, then I think there is a good way there to go forward. But I think that's the reason why it's so easy for us to talk about the Libet-style experiments and things like that, because there's something there that all of us can chip in. Whereas if the philosophers talk about free will in some general terms and the neuroscientists talk about the data, there's not really much there. So if we can focus more on some specific cases rather than these big conceptual issues, perhaps we can get there as well.
Thank you. I think that's a good idea. Yep.
Tom?
Thank you. I would say you could have both. But you could start with the concept of people with different perspectives and go ahead. But I want to say something relevant perhaps to future planning. These kind of meetings, as you've said, are very difficult because we're really coming here not only from different disciplines, sometimes from the same discipline, but we have very different paradigms. There are a lot of paradigms flying around here. And usually it's very difficult if you're in one paradigm to really understand the language, the assumptions, etc. of another paradigm. So that's one of the things that we learn. I mean, when you have a social scientist here and we're listening to neuroscientists, this is, a completely different level of thinking, analysis, investigation, and so on. So the question is, have our dialogues been effective? I think some of them have been. At least they have been, I can say personally. But I also think that we've had many failures here to understand one another better. And I think what that takes is you have to, almost after there has been a presentation and even a discussion, that you have to follow up on it some way and keep it sort of rolling. And I can even make an observation that concerns me, our work. We introduced two new concepts. We introduced the concept of reflective consciousness, carefully distinguishing it from other kinds of consciousness, not with a full-blown sort of definitional framework, but at least we stated it. We also introduced the concept of bounded free will, which could take into account the kind of constraints that social scientists are always emphasizing, social structural, economic, material kinds of constraints. And so, with these two concepts, you might have expected that somebody would have asked, well, really, what do you mean? Or, what can you do with that? Basically, after talking to a number of you after the presentation, I don't think very many of you understood what we said. And it was in the paper also, with illustrations, etc. So I would use that as a sort of an example of the kind of problems we have. Okay? And I do think certain kinds of conceptual and methodological distinctions can help us, and that has to do with precisely what you emphasize, Hans, about levels. And I also think that it's important to pursue the question of the relationship between empirical data and concepts. In sociology, we often are emphasizing that there are concepts, kind of data, or structuring the kind of data that we have and work with, and also that the empirical material has influence the concepts. Again, I would emphasize that in all of our sciences, we have both a conceptual level and we also have an empirical level. And I think philosophy also has those levels, and they differ. That is, if you look at what philosophers say about many social phenomena, it doesn't match very well with what economists and sociologists say about this.
I guess that's a point very well taken, and I think you better than anyone can explain to us that the reason why discussions tend to gravitate one way or another is largely sociological. And so I would say that if you had had more of your colleagues around, then probably these sorts of topics would have come up more often. And so given that this is highly dominated by neuroscience philosophy and the philosophers that are interested in neuroscience, I think that sort of, and I hope you would agree my lay assessment, then this is what we can talk about without too much extra effort. And so the things that you would require, I would say that either really require one or two or both things. That is, either you need to have a more balanced selection of participants, or a more structured way of discussing by saying, okay, now we've beforehand decided on certain topics, and now so we're going to discuss these topics. And for that, you just need to have more time for structured discussion when you can actually get into that, rather than a 5-minute Q&A after the presentation.
Actually, so yeah, one thing I have to say, we started this conference and we sent out the first email. We said there will be a lot of time for informal discussions, and then we ended up with a conference where I was spending a lot of time looking at my watch and going, okay, 1 minute, okay, thank you, that was a brilliant question, but so we'll try to do better on the next conference, and it's always a balance between we want different people to hear what different people say, but I think it is actually really critical to leave, I don't know, sometimes you want structure, sometimes you want unstructured, but leave time for less formal, maybe not informal, but less formal discussions than we had in this conference. But that's, I got a lot of people telling me, and we'll see how that comes in the questionnaires as well, people saying, well, we needed more time to talk, and then I had people coming and say, we needed a shorter conference too. So, we could start having, asynchronous sessions and so on, but then you're going to miss a lot of the things. So it's hard to balance everything out. But anyway, that was my 2 cents.
Yeah, actually most of our meetings that we try to have here are based on having very few speakers and much more time for discussion. So this is a very different conference in this sense. Actually, next time we will have something like this is in December, on the day before the Nobel Prize is being given. When the Agora is celebrating its 20th anniversary, we will have on challenges in the biosciences, and Dennis Noble will come here, and he will be the main character or speaker, and we will have a couple of others, but most of the time will be devoted to discussions around his presentation and others' comments. So yes, more time is necessary, but as I think I said, and I believe that for a starter, if you haven't, it's like having a big poster session here, actually. You present something very quickly, and you get a feeling for what people are doing and what they are thinking. And then the next step would be to have more of these other kinds of discussions that we are talking about now. So maybe at the next conference that Uri will organize, primarily perhaps with some other people's help, in California, maybe it could be sort of a continuation where this opening up is actually taking us further and more and deeper into the issues that we couldn't deal with this time.
So to shift the focus a little bit, I think there have been several very good suggestions, recommendations, and so on. But still, I want to commend yet again the organizer. I think this was fantastic. And I personally have benefited a lot. I think that this is eye-opening in many ways to different ideas and different ways of thinking about products. So my overall comment is absolutely positive, fantastic, even with some of these recommendations. More in general, where I think there is what I personally am quite very, very interested in is what would it take any of us, and I think we're all pretty stubborn people, so what would it take for any of us to change our minds on any of these specific themes? So you try to push the philosophers on what kind of scientific experiment would change your mind on this or that. Peter, he asked the very pertinent and very good question to me, what would it take to change my mind on the notion that the sun goes around the earth, or that there's freedom, or one of those strange ideas. But I think those are, I think, potential avenues for collaboration, for people to actually thinking beyond what can be accomplished in 20 minutes, and hopefully sort of continue many of these discussions afterwards. Via journals, via publications, via collaborations, via emails, and all the amazing formats that we have now. But again, overall, I think that despite some of these discussions, I think overall super positive, amazing.
If anybody else want to tell us how wonderful we are, please go ahead.
Just to deal with the question of how do you change people's minds.
TMS. Our TMS.
Presumably, if one has a constructed experiment with a clear hypothesis that everybody agrees is a reasonable experiment and reasonably organized, and you approach it with some sort of equanimity in terms of saying, well, maybe it's going to be this way, maybe it's going to be that way, and you do the experiment, and hopefully then what the answer is would be something that would say, oh, well, all right, we did the experiment, comes out this way, this is the right answer, even if you might have thought something else before. So that was the essence of one of the questions that I had earlier about how do you deal with that at the conceptual level. Because I think the concepts are extremely important because that helps guide thinking in terms of the types of experiments that neuroscientists can do. But the question there is, how do you decide what is the right conceptual framework in which to build that experiment so that when you do it, people would say, all right, it is possible to change your mind on that because there's now some evidence that pulls you in one way or the other for so doing. So if there's no way that you can prove or disprove a particular concept other than it sounds good, then it might be very difficult to change people's minds because it continues to sound good, regardless. So I think there perhaps has to be some way of trying to settle what is a better concept, or which then will also help frame what is a better experiment from a neuroscience point of view. So I think this is really a very important issue, which I think we talked about a little bit, but I'm not sure that I got a completely satisfactory answer to that question.
And actually, continuing on that thought, I think we are lucky in the sense that now politically we're all scientists or scholars, we all have to publish, and I think people are starting now to understand that sometimes you design the perfect experiment and the result just doesn't end up being what you want it to be. And we've got some even top-notch journals now that let you pre-register things, and then they say we will publish whatever the result would happen to be. So that's actually, I think we're lucky to start living in an era where you can say, okay, the question is important enough. Now, regardless of the answer, we're going to get published again. Sorry for being political, but that's something we have to consider also as scholars. So that actually goes well with your question. If we design the right experiment, I think we can now go and say, okay, here we're pre-registering it, and regardless of what we get, we could get that published, which could be very important as well.
Let me just say, one thing about experiment is that you also have to interpret its results. You have to make an partly subjective interpretation of what the results mean. And I think with regard, for example, to the Libet experiments, there are many ways you can interpret those experiments, as we have heard some of them being discussed here. So the interpretation, I think we should not neglect in this issue, when we are concerned with what kind of experiments. Because also when we set up an experiment, I mean, we have some assumption of what kind of answers we could get. I mean, it's like when you do particle physics and you set up an experiment testing whether a light beam is a beam of particles or if it's waves. So you set up the experiment and you get the kind of answer that fits your assumption. And I think this is similar in neuroscience, of course, as in many sciences, that we have to be careful and we have to be aware of what kind of assumptions we have, what kind of paradigm are we living in, so when we interpret the results.
So actually my comment is just following up directly on both of yours. I confessed yesterday that I'm a kind of dualist, not thinking that mental phenomena are reducible to physical phenomena. So you might think that I would advocate a kind of fundamental change, say, in the methods of Gabriel here. But I don't, and the reason is that if my kind of dualism is true, we can only understand what kind of difference mental phenomena make ultimately to the physical goings-on in the brain if we have a very thorough understanding of the underlying physical processes in their own terms. So I think regardless of whether a kind of a strong emergentist or more reductionist view of mental phenomena are true, methodologically, that's an ontological question, methodologically, reductionism is a sort of important strategy because it lays a foundation. But looking ahead though, and this is where I pick up on your comment, if you're interested in the question of the future of neuroscience and could we begin to test these sorts of things, you do have to sort of get inside the head of alternative perspectives on what are ultimately philosophical questions that really aren't settled. People have debated and continue to debate versus materialism versus dualism, and so try to think creatively. Okay, I think as you're saying, if you don't sort of take seriously the possibility of an alternative framework, you won't know what to look for. You won't be thinking imaginatively about how to frame what would the alternative hypothesis look like. So you might just miss it because you're biased against it.
Oh, I think it was Peter. Oh, sorry, I missed track.
There's a question behind you as well.
I think now I missed the track. I lost track of who was first. I think we have Pavel, Peter, and Rainer. I've seen waving.
Okay, so let me say a little bit more about the underlying assumptions. I mean, a lot of people mention physicalism as something that presumably everybody accepts, almost, many philosophers. But one thing to realize is that we don't actually know what the physical means. I mean, as a true naturalist, you should then ask the natural sciences what physical is. But of course, then we have to go to fundamental physics, and as we briefly mentioned, that there is no real agreement there. And so in some sense, we don't yet have a good scientific metaphysics. We just think we have. Now, but of course, we do know something about quantum mechanics, which gives indications. Like everybody knows the indeterminacy. That's the sort of thing, almost the only thing that people mention about quantum theory in passing. And that's true. Quantum world is very fragile, so even in the bone theory, you cannot send signals with the quantum potential. If you could, it would rise to crazy things. But there's something, I think, in quantum theory which is much more important, and that is wholeness. So even in the case of if you do the hydrogen atom in the bone theory, you can see it's the quantum state of the whole that decides what the parts do. And the same with, of course, the entanglement. And so this has to be part of our scientific metaphysics unless quantum theory is wrong, which at the moment we think it's not. And of course, now we don't know how that all may or may not translate into neuroscience. But if we think of quantum mechanics as giving us prototype models, like what is intuitive terms, it would be perfectly natural to think that something, mind could be some sort of field that could actually control the particles and fields in the brain, rather than the particles and the fields in the brain and the classically producing mind. So this is something that I feel very, from my point of view, I think we're still, when it comes to physics, this sort of neuroscience is still in the 1800s. Okay, we don't have the quantum brain theory. We have attempts to do that, but I somehow see in the future that if we want to be a physicalist, we should really take seriously what natural science says about physics, and then ask, well, does this have any relevance to neuroscience and these other questions? And that quantum mechanics is not just indeterminism, it's about new kinds of necessity, like non-locality and the priority of the whole, like Jonathan Schaffer would say. But anyway, that was a bit of a sermon.
Yeah, so this is a much more mundane comment, but so I run a group of attention researchers for our National Science Foundation. It's only 14 of us, but one of the most valuable things we do is we meet once a month as a group virtually, and there's a program that we use called Blue Jeans that's much better than Skype without all these delays and stuff. And so what I do would be that, subgroups of us can meet virtually, and not only, once a year or something.
Okay, good idea. Blue jean?
Blue jeans.
Is it jeans like this or jeans like? Oh, jeans. Okay.
I believe we have two. The question of empirical and conceptual approach to the world. But we have a third. We must see a third level. It's the scientist himself. If a scientist is a free person, he has the possibility to choose the own approaches. And he is choosing them belonging to his history. There are questions about whether, which this question doesn't play any role. But when it belongs to responsibility or freedom or knowledge, then I, as a person, are interested before that the outcome must not change my system. And therefore we have three layers, three levels. The empirical is this question about freedom. The empirical, the conceptual, and myself. And this must, the last is the most difficult question.
The problem is that in natural science we have tried to define a way or to neglect the subject and trying to objectify the world.